Welcome to this edition of the Capitol Notebook. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program is the New York State Assembly's Minority Leader, Assemblyman Brian Kolb. Brian Kolb represents an assembly district in the Finger Lakes in central New York, including Ontario and Seneca counties. We want to thank all you folks across New York State for joining us. Assemblyman Kolb, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
I want to talk with you today about what has got to be a very serious issue facing the New York State Assembly, and that's some bad press. I mean, the legislature has been dealing with some pretty bad press over the last few weeks, some might say the last few years, as a number of members of the state legislature have been charged with crimes, handcuffed, led away, in some cases convicted of those crimes, and imprisoned. It would be one thing if I said, this happened a week ago, which it did, and it was an isolated incident, but it seems as if it's not an isolated incident, and it's almost become a trend here. That's got to be difficult for an institution that is designed to make the laws of the state and not break the laws of the state.
Well, first and foremost, bad behavior by bad people, no amount of laws or professions are going to stop it. If someone's going to attempt to break the law to pad their own pockets or to gain political favor or any sort of favor at all in any profession, it's something that we just have to contend with as a society. And it's just that elected officials are much more of a visible target because people want to hold elected officials to a higher standard, which is totally legitimate and should be held to a higher standard. So they will get a heck of a lot more media play than the average person committing a similar or dissimilar infraction. So it's not good for the institution. It's not good for public confidence in state government. It's been an issue for a long time. But whether you have one incident or 15 incidences, it's just one too many. And that's really why we have to continue to find ways or look for ways and solutions to try to, if you will, make it much more difficult or much of a greater deterrent for a legislator or statewide official to think about breaking the law to their personal advantage. And that's really what the conversation has to be about in the coming weeks and days and before the end of session. And there are proposal ideas out there. Some are okay and some are better than others, but I think there's still a lot more that we can do.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. As the saying goes, we're all sinners. I mean, there's none of us who should be.
For yourself.
Yes, sir. I forgot. Who wants to cast the first stone? I mean, you don't want to put yourself in that position. But as I said, it's an institution that's known to be creating the laws of the state, and I guess there is a certain amount of public trust that goes with that, and I guess that's why we need to have the discussion, and why maybe there's a special emphasis put on those who are, charged with such things at this level.
Well, again, it's all about the public and transparency and confidence, and respect for what an elected official does or doesn't do in office. And we have to set an example. People do make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Nobody's perfect, which is your comment. But certainly I think down in Albany and in New York City, it's been a prevalent issue. And I would have to say more New York City than upstate. If you just look at the sheer numbers of where the elected officials have had problems, or New York City mostly centric incidences. It doesn't mean that there isn't a couple upstaters that haven't been involved here, but predominantly it is really a New York City centered issue. But it doesn't matter whether it's New York City or upstate or downstate or the island. We have to do something about it.
As I've been thinking about this situation, what strikes me is something that you've talked about here many times, and that is the need for openness in government and not having, for example, behind closed doors budget negotiations. Now, it's not to say that negotiations going on behind closed doors is a crime or might precipitate a crime, but it's part of the culture of doing things secretively in Albany, and maybe that sort of mindset does foster some of that kind of behavior that happens. I don't know. I don't know that that's an answer or even a potential indicator of it, but it just strikes me that you know, there's a lot that goes on around here that people want to be vague about or secretive about.
Well, there's a lot of tentacles to this issue. Quite frankly, it isn't just about a stiffer penalty or a longer jail term. You have to look at what creates these situations, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in the show. But this is where lawmakers get entrenched too long, leaders get entrenched too long, committee chairs get entrenched too long, and then they start taking advantage of absolute power and having undue influence about what happens or doesn't happen. Gerrymandering, the setting of redistrict boundaries, leads to less competitive elections, which leads to more absolute power, which is a problem. People that break campaign finance laws all the time or don't report activities, for instance, where people are working on a campaign and they're being paid for by a labor union to do so, but that money is not reported as a benefit that's being received by a legislator or a statewide elected official. I think that's a problem. So there's a lot of areas of opportunity for improvement, and by making the place better, and transparency is another key thing. I mean, when we talk about the governor's position on hydrofracking, he says, we need to take our time and make a decision based on facts, not emotions. But then when we talk about the New York SAFE Act, we throw that framework right out the window and say we're going to deal with an issue on emotions and not facts. So that's the inconsistencies, bills that are done in the dead of night, and this leads to, again, more uncertainty and distrust by the public.
You stood recently with several members of your Assembly Minority Conference to promote an idea that you think might be able to curtail some of the problem that we're talking about here, and that is recall elections. You folks, I'm sure, have heard in recent years some high-profile recall elections in this nation. There was one recently in the state of Wisconsin for the governor there, a very high-profile recall election involving the governor of California a few years back. Let's take a look and a listen to some of what Assemblyman Kolb said at the beginning of that press conference, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about recall elections and other ideas with Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb.
We're here to talk about a couple different subjects. The key topic, is corruption in Albany and what to do about it. Today we're going to kick off one of many proposals that the Assembly Republican Conference has been reviewing and talking about with our conference over the past several weeks. And the conversation doesn't start today and doesn't stop today. But we're going to talk about a specific proposal, a bill that one of our fellow colleagues here, Jim Tedisco, has sponsored, and is one of these initiatives that we believe can send a strong message to the public that we're going to be serious about taking action against those officials that shouldn't be in office any longer. And part of that is involving the public. And that concept is recall. And the legislation that Jim's going to talk about shortly is the opportunity for the public to recall a public official, a statewide elected official, or a state senator or a state assembly member, through a process that will lead to the removal of their office if the voters deem necessary, either across the state or in a particular Senate or Assembly district. Certainly, I think part of today is to continue the conversation of ideas, which the Assembly Republican Conference is known for, and to try to move the dialogue dealing with whatever options, ideas, solutions we can have to restore public confidence in their state government.
Nice to see legislators standing together to do just that. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of recall elections. So what would happen here is maybe one of these legislators who has been charged with a crime, the people who voted in that district, what would you do, get a number of signatures or a petition together?
Actually, petitions that requires 20% of the total number of people that turned out to vote in the last election. So if and it's also for a statewide elected official. So, for instance, as a state attorney general, if the last time that race was held, there was 2 million votes across the state, 20% of that number, those are the number of petitions that have to be gathered. They submit those petitions, and they have to be registered voters. to the Secretary of State, and then there's an automatic recall election, which means 180 days later, there's a recall election that goes on the ballot, and you either vote yes for the recall or no, not against the recall. And so if there's more yeses than noes, then the official is automatically removed from office, and then another election is held for a person to replace that person that was just removed. And really, there's been 19 states that have already have recall elections on the books. There have been a total of 36 state legislators that have been recalled or gone through a recall election. About half have been removed from office. Several gubernatorial races. You mentioned Scott Walker, who survived a recall election, but Governor Gray Davis out of California was removed from office. The thing about recall, it's a tool in the toolbox, Mike, for the voters to have a voice in whether that person stays or goes. And it's something that the power is in the people's hands rather than the power brokers, or rather than waiting 2 years for a court case to wind its way through the system when everybody knows that this particular person should go for whatever reason. So again, it's a tool to use, and I think it's somewhere it sends a serious message to legislators and to statewide elected officials that that's a deterrent. Hopefully that'll act as a deterrent, that there's another way to get them out of office if we need to remove them.
I was intrigued at that press conference that a lot of the questions that came from the press afterwards had to do with, well, would this make it too easy to get somebody out of office? And then other questions were, well, this sounds like it would be too complicated or too hard for the people to get the petitions together. I guess you have to draw or walk some kind of a line that says, well, you don't want to make it too easy, you don't want to make it too hard.
Well, if this was the first time this has ever been done, then you could understand more of these types of questions. But when 19 other states have done it, it hasn't been a roughshod approach where hundreds and hundreds of legislators are pulled out of office. I think the general public takes recall very seriously, and you're not going to just recall an official because he voted no on an issue that you want him to vote yes on or her on. So I think it's a process that a lot of seriousness is looked at, and it's more the exception rather than the rule.
All right, and you also spoke at that press conference about some of the other ideas that are on the table. Let's take a look at that, and we'll come back and finish up today's Capitol Notebook with Brian Kolb.
And certainly some of the things that we're talking about and we will be formalizing. For instance, I have a bill for term limits for leaders. I think we should restrict the limits and the terms of committee chairs in the legislature. Campaign finance reform, restricting the use of campaign funds and how those monies are used. Certainly increasing bans and penalties for offenders. And there's more. Removing the ability of once an elected official has committed crime, that they have to forfeit their public pension. So there's a lot of specifics, additional specific ideas for discussion with the legislature and the governor. Several days ago, I called Governor Cuomo and expressed to him that I, myself speaking on behalf of our conference, are willing to work with him collaboratively on ideas and solutions on this issue.
I know a lot of people who think that concept of forfeiting the public pensions if someone's convicted of a crime. There are some legislators who think that would be enough right there to have lawmakers giving certain actions a second thought.
Well, I agree, and that's why we have to have more of I'll call it a laundry list of ideas that basically just makes it very tough and hopefully even serve as a deterrent for a legislator to think twice, or a statewide elected official, before they do something that's shall we say, against the public's interest. And so we've got a lot more to talk about, a lot more proposals to hash over in the coming days and weeks, and we're going to be at the forefront of pushing for dramatic reform, not just, shall we say, lip service to the process.
All right, well, we'll be talking with you over the next coming weeks for this legislative session. Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb, thanks for joining us today. And we want to thank you folks, too, for spending your time with us, and we'll hope to see you all soon for that next edition of the Capitol Notebook.